I spent 6 months watching him parade around the office with my ideas, my code, my future. Brilliant innovation, Max, they'd say, while I silently compiled evidence, waiting for the perfect moment to reveal the truth. It all started before I even left for bereavement leave. Max had been positioning himself as my collaborator for weeks, but I never imagined how far he'd go once I was away. When your mom dies unexpectedly from a brain aneurysm at 62, time becomes this strange, elastic thing. I took 2 weeks off, the standard bereavement leave our company graciously offers, barely enough time to process what happened, let alone plan and attend a funeral. I remember sitting in my childhood home in Michigan, surrounded by sympathy, casseroles and relatives who didn't know what to say. My laptop closed for the first time in years. Meanwhile, back at Nextech Solutions, Max Donovan was accelerating the groundwork he'd laid for weeks. The project was called Phoenix, appropriate, considering what eventually rose from its ashes. It was an AI-driven predictive maintenance system that could revolutionize how our clients handled equipment failures. I'd been working on it nights and weekends, documenting everything meticulously in our company's version control system. The algorithm was my baby, built on 2 years of research and testing. When I walked back into the office that Monday, expecting sympathetic nods and the usual mountain of catch-up work, I found something else entirely. First came the email from Diana to the department. Following the accelerated development of Project Phoenix during the past month, we're fast-tracking Max Donovan's promotion recommendation to Senior Development Lead. Then, the confused Slack messages from a few colleagues. Wasn't Phoenix your project? Finally, the gut punch, walking past the conference room to see my diagrams on the whiteboard with Max's name in the corner. I stood there, grief still raw, staring through the glass at my intellectual property now branded with someone else's name. When Max spotted me, his confidence visibly faltered. He gave me a tight nod and quickly looked away, suddenly very interested in his laptop screen. Updated. Wow, I didn't expect this to blow up overnight. Thanks for all the supportive comments. Some of you asked why I didn't immediately confront Max or go to HR. I was still processing my mom's death and honestly too shocked to react properly. Have you ever been so blindsided you couldn't even form words? Max and I had never been friends, but we weren't enemies either, at least that's what I thought. We were simply colleagues who occasionally collaborated on projects, grabbed lunch with the same group, and made small talk at company happy hours. He'd been at Nextech for about 3 years, a year less than me, and had a reputation for being ambitious. The kind of guy who stayed late when the boss was working, laughed a little too hard at executive jokes, and somehow always managed to position himself in group photos right next to leadership. About a month before my mother's death, Max had started showing unusual interest in Phoenix. This looks fascinating, he'd say, hovering over my shoulder. Mind if I take a look at the architecture? At the time, I appreciated having someone to bounce ideas off of. He'd offer to help with documentation or review some code, while I focused on the complex algorithmic parts. I thought he was being collegial. In reality, he was laying groundwork. What I didn't realize until later was how desperate he'd become. Max had been passed over for promotion twice already. His last performance review, which I later discovered through a sympathetic HR friend, had specifically mentioned his lack of innovative contributions. He needed a big win, and Phoenix was his ticket. My mother's sudden death was simply convenient. Timing. Diana Wells, our department head, had always been fair but distant, more focused on metrics and deliverables than the people producing them. She'd approved my initial Phoenix proposal 6 months earlier, with a distracted nod and a sounds promising, keep me updated. I had, through proper channels, documented emails and scheduled check-ins. But Diana was managing 5 teams and 50 people. Details fell through cracks. Records could be misplaced. Plausible deniability was her specialty. Nextech Solutions isn't a small company. We have over 600 employees across 3 offices, developing enterprise software solutions for Fortune 500 clients. Our corporate culture officially promotes innovation and integrity, according to the posters in our lobby, but unofficially rewards whoever shouts the loudest about their accomplishments. I'd always been the quiet, heads-down type who believed results speak for themselves. That was my first mistake. I'd spent weekends building Phoenix while Max was posting LinkedIn updates about hustle culture from brunches at trendy downtown spots. I'd refined algorithms until 3 a.m. while he was cultivating his personal brand at industry mixers. But in the corporate world, perception often trumps reality, and Max was a master of perception. Now here I was, standing in the aftermath of my mother's funeral, watching someone else reap the rewards of my work, and wondering how everything had gone so wrong so quickly. I waited exactly 48 hours before approaching Diana, giving myself time to gather initial evidence and calm down. Her office door was open, but her attention was fixed on her monitors, 3 of them, displaying different dashboards and metrics. She didn't look up when I knocked. "Diana, do you have a minute to discuss Project Phoenix?" I kept my voice steady. She glanced up briefly. "Phoenix? Max's implementation? What about it?" Those words, Max's implementation, felt like acid. I explained as calmly as I could that Phoenix was actually my development, started 6 months ago with her approval, and that all the core work had been done by me before my bereavement leave. Diana's expression shifted from distracted to concerned, then carefully neutral. "I understand you're going through a difficult time with your mother's passing, and I'm very sorry for your loss. Look, Max has been working closely on Phoenix for weeks now, even before your leave. He stepped up when you were away and pushed it across the finish line." "That's not accurate," I said. "I have the original." "I'll look into it," she interrupted, her tone professional but dismissive. "Submit your concerns through email with any documentation you have. I have a meeting in 5 minutes." She turned back to her screens. As I turned to leave, she added, "And let's keep this between us for now. No need to create unnecessary tension in the team." I left her office knowing exactly what would happen to my concerns. They'd be buried under more urgent priorities. This was corporate speak for, "I don't want to deal with this." That night, I considered quitting. I updated my resume, browsed LinkedIn jobs, and drafted resignation emails I never sent. But something kept nagging at me. Not just the injustice, but the arrogance of it. Max thought he could get away with it because people like me just accept and move on. Diana believed him because it was convenient. Instead of quitting, I formulated a plan. This wasn't about revenge, it was about truth. And truth, unlike revenge, requires patience and precision. First, I needed evidence. Irrefutable, time-stamped, third-party verified evidence. I started with Google Drive, where I'd stored backup copies of my work. The metadata showed creation and modification dates going back 6 months. I exported the version history as PDFs, each page showing my account details and timestamps. However, some of the most recent files had been corrupted during a sync error, a frustrating setback. Next came GitHub commits. Although Max had gained access to our internal repository and made changes, he hadn't been thorough enough to check the commit history backed up on my local machine. I had proof of many, though not all, lines of code I'd written when I'd written them, and comments explaining my thought process. Some commits were missing due to a merge conflict I hadn't resolved before my leave. Then I remembered something that gave me hope. Amazon AWS logs. I'd been running tests on AWS using my personal account before migrating to the company servers. Many tests, iterations, failures, and successes, logged with timestamps and my credentials. Not everything was there, but enough to establish a pattern. The emails were more problematic. Max had apparently deleted correspondence from the company servers, and my own Gmail archive was incomplete. I had several messages I'd sent myself with subject lines like Phoenix Update and AI Module Breakthrough, but they didn't cover the entire development timeline. I spent weeks gathering fragments, piecing together a timeline that had gaps but still told a compelling story. Each piece alone might be dismissed, but together they painted a clear picture of theft. An unexpected source emerged when I casually mentioned my situation to Jin from Quality Assurance. He lowered his voice, looking around the break room before speaking. "I remember you showing me the early Phoenix prototype long before your leave," he said. "Max came to me last month asking basic questions about how it worked, questions the developer would already know." Jin was hesitant to get involved formally. He had a family, a mortgage, couldn't risk his position. But he did review my evidence privately, confirming its accuracy. Another break came from Melissa in marketing. During a company happy hour, after her second glass of wine, she mentioned recording a brainstorming session months ago where I had outlined the initial Phoenix concept. She'd been working on a different project, but kept the recording because the whiteboard mapping technique was cool. It took 3 more conversations and a coffee bribe before she reluctantly shared the file. The evidence was substantial, but incomplete. Some critical files were missing, some timestamps were unclear, and I had few witnesses willing to go on record. This wasn't the perfect dossier I'd hoped for. It was messy, like real life, but it was enough to raise serious questions. Meanwhile, Max grew increasingly comfortable with his stolen success. He began adding features to Phoenix that were already in my original design specifications, presenting each as a new innovation. Most colleagues, focused on their own projects and deadlines, accepted his narrative without question. A few gave me curious glances, but never spoke up. Diana avoided me entirely, rerouting our usual interactions through team leads and email chains. Perhaps she suspected something wasn't right, but had invested too much political capital in Max's promotion to backtrack. Or maybe she just didn't want the headache of investigating. 3 months in, I learned that Next Tech would be showcasing Phoenix at Tech Forward, the biggest industry conference of the year. The CEO himself would introduce the technology, with Max giving the main presentation to hundreds of industry leaders, potential clients, and tech journalists. It was scheduled for exactly 6 months after my return from bereavement leave. Perfect timing. I continued gathering evidence, carefully avoiding tipping my hand. I recovered an early sketch of the Phoenix architecture on a napkin from Chipotle that I'd photographed and texted to myself, though the image was blurry. I discovered comments in the code that Max had altered but not completely erased. I even found a quarterly performance note where Diana had mentioned my promising initial work on predictive maintenance AI, though the language was vague enough to be dismissed. 2 weeks before Tech Forward, Jin approached me again, looking nervous. "I can't put my name on anything," he said. "But that variable naming convention you always use, with the double underscore prefix for dependencies, it's still all over the code. Max doesn't even understand why it's there. He called it legacy. Cruft in a code review yesterday. This small technical detail was another thread in my tapestry of evidence. Not definitive alone, but significant when woven together with everything else. The day of Tech Forward arrived. The conference hall was packed with industry insiders, the front row reserved for our executive team. I sat quietly in the middle rows, an unmarked manila envelope on my lap, my laptop open and connected to the conference Wi-Fi. Our CEO, Robert Keane, took the stage to enthusiastic applause. "Today," he announced, "Nextech Solutions unveils technology that will transform the industry. The brilliant mind behind this innovation will walk you through it. Please welcome Max Donovan, our senior development lead." Max strode onto the stage, confidence radiating from his expensive suit and practiced smile. Behind him, the massive screen displayed the Phoenix logo, my design, though slightly modified. "Thank you, Robert," Max began. "I'm excited to share with you a journey of innovation that began 6 months ago when I identified a critical gap in predictive maintenance solutions." As he launched into his rehearsed speech, I opened my email and attached my evidence, a 42-page PDF titled Project Phoenix Development History and Evidence of Authorship. I addressed it to key decision-makers, the executive team, several respected journalists I'd researched in advance, and of course, Max and Diana. The subject line was simple. The truth about Project Phoenix, documentation enclosed. I hit send. For the first few minutes, nothing happened. Then I noticed Robert Keane glance down at his phone, frown slightly, and open the document. In the front row, our CTO did the same. A tech journalist near the back stood up and quietly left the room, phone to his ear. Max continued his presentation, unaware of the shifting atmosphere until he reached a technical explanation that made little sense. He was describing my algorithm without understanding it. He stumbled, looked to Diana for help, and found her staring at her phone, face pale. As the presentation progressed, a subtle murmur spread through the audience. A few people were showing their screens to neighbors. Someone was typing frantically. Robert Keane was now openly scrolling through the document, his expression darkening. Max faltered again, noticing something was off. "As you can see from this architecture diagram I developed—" "Max," Robert interrupted, his voice controlled, but tense. "I think we need a brief intermission. Technical difficulties." He turned to the audience. "Please enjoy refreshments in the lobby. We'll resume shortly." As attendees filed out, Robert beckoned to me with a subtle gesture. Diana was already hurrying toward Max, whispering urgently. The truth was finally emerging, not in a dramatic confrontation, but in the quiet collapse of a carefully constructed lie. Updated. Thank you all for the supportive messages. You're asking great questions about the legal aspects. No, I didn't pursue legal action outside the company. The corporate IP agreement makes things complicated. Several of you mentioned similar experiences, which is honestly heartbreaking. Would you have waited as long as I did, or confronted the situation immediately? What followed was both the most excruciating and most vindicating 3 days of my professional life. The presentation was delayed due to technical issues, while Robert Keane called an immediate meeting with me, Max, Diana, and our legal counsel, in a small conference room off the main hall. That first meeting wasn't the dramatic vindication scene from a movie. It was tense, awkward, and inconclusive. Max denied everything, claiming we had been collaborating all along and that I was suddenly trying to claim sole credit after he'd refined and completed the project. Diana carefully spoke of misunderstandings and unclear attribution. The legal team requested time to review all documentation. I was asked to present a condensed version of Phoenix at the conference the next day, alongside Max, an uncomfortable compromise that left the audience confused but kept the company from publicly admitting what had happened. Robert was clearly furious, but also pragmatic. Nextech's reputation couldn't afford a public scandal. Over the next 3 days, I sat through meetings with HR, legal, and executives while they combed through every piece of evidence. Witnesses were interviewed, timestamps verified, code was analyzed. The process was exhausting, and often felt like I was the one under investigation. Max's story evolved constantly. First it was, we collaborated. Then, we had the same idea independently. Finally, when confronted with the AWS logs and the recording from Melissa, he tried a new approach. I thought he'd abandoned the project when he left. I was just making sure the company didn't lose valuable IP. By the end of the week, Nextech had reached its verdict. Max wasn't dramatically escorted out by security. Corporate America rarely works that way. Instead, he was placed on administrative leave pending an internal review. He cleared out his desk after hours when few people would see him. 2 weeks later, a brief email announced his departure to pursue other opportunities. No mention of Phoenix. No acknowledgement of what had happened. Diana wasn't fired either. She received a formal reprimand in her file and was required to attend ethics training. More significantly, her performance bonus took a substantial hit, and she was assigned a co-manager to help with departmental oversight, a corporate punishment that hurt her wallet and pride without creating additional drama. As for me, I received a series of carefully worded acknowledgments. Robert Keane sent a company-wide email recognizing me as the primary architect and developer of Project Phoenix. I was given a substantial but not extraordinary raise, and a new title. Lead Developer, Predictive Systems. Not Director or anything flashy. That would have been too obvious an admission of error, but enough to mark my increased status. The reactions from colleagues were mixed and revealing. Some expressed genuine shock and support. Others maintained careful neutrality, not wanting to be seen taking sides in what was clearly a politically charged situation. A few even suggested I should have handled it internally, rather than creating a public scene, as if the theft itself wasn't the real problem. Jin eventually admitted to HR that he'd known about my early work, though he downplayed how certain he'd been. Melissa confirmed the recording's authenticity but claimed she hadn't made the connection until receiving my email. Everyone was protecting their own position in the corporate ecosystem. Most surprisingly, Nextech implemented new protocols for project attribution and intellectual property protection, though they were never officially connected to the Phoenix incident. All innovations now required multiple verification points and clear documentation of contribution from inception to completion. Over the weeks that followed, I gradually rebuilt my professional reputation. Some colleagues who had accepted Max's story without question now sought subtle ways to align themselves with me. Others maintained a respectful distance. A few whispered that I had been lucky to find that evidence, or that I'd played the bereavement card to gain sympathy. Corporate politics never truly ends. I focused on Phoenix itself, assembling a small team to continue its development, insisting on clear attribution for everyone's contributions. The work itself became my refuge from the lingering awkwardness and shifting alliances. As the dust settled, Robert Keane called me to his office for a private conversation. He was direct. This was badly handled at multiple levels. You should have come to me immediately. Diana should have investigated properly. Legal should have been involved earlier. Before I could respond, he continued. That said, you've proven yourself not just technically but strategically. We need more people who stand up for what's right, even when it's uncomfortable. He paused. Just next time, come to me first. It wasn't quite an apology, but in corporate terms, it was close. It's been 18 months since Tech Forward. Phoenix has been successfully implemented for 9 major clients, generating significant revenue for Nextech. My team has grown to 12 people, all of whom receive proper credit for their contributions. The patents, 2 granted, 1 pending, list my name as primary inventor. Max found employment at a smaller competitor after several months of job searching. Our industry isn't that big, and while nothing was ever publicly acknowledged, rumors travel. I hear he keeps a much lower profile now, focusing on actual development rather than taking credit. Diana and I maintain a strictly professional relationship. She's still with the company, though her star has dimmed somewhat. In meetings, she's noticeably careful about attribution and documentation. Sometimes I catch her watching me with an unreadable expression, respect, resentment, or perhaps just caution. The most meaningful outcome came 6 months after Tech Forward. A junior developer approached me hesitantly one afternoon. I wanted to thank you, she said. I was stuck in a situation where my ideas were being borrowed. Seeing how you handled things gave me the courage to speak up and document my work properly. Her words meant more than any corporate recognition. I'd never intended to be an example, but if my experience helped someone else protect their work, then some good had come from it all. Last month, I visited my mother's grave with news about a Phoenix adaptation for healthcare systems, technology that might have helped detect her aneurysm earlier. I like to think she would have been proud, not of the corporate drama or even the professional success, but of standing up for the truth with patience and evidence rather than anger. If there's one lesson in all of this, it's that in both grief and injustice, the path forward isn't always immediate confrontation. Sometimes it's careful documentation, strategic patience, and the quiet confidence that truth, properly presented, will eventually be recognized. Not everyone will stand and applaud when it does. Not everyone will admit their role in allowing injustice to occur. But you'll know, and the people who matter will know too. Updated. This is my final update on this situation. Phoenix is now being implemented across multiple industries, and we've even adapted it for healthcare applications my mom would have benefited from. Many asked about Diana. She's still with the company but keeps her distance. I've come to realize that while justice is satisfying, building something meaningful from the experience matters more. Have you ever had to choose between immediate confrontation and the long game?